Thanks for joining us for Khari Free at Last on Bounce 23 TV. I'm Khari Naharo. The Columbus City Schools is in the midst of perhaps the largest scandal in its history, yet it's demanding tax-drenched voters' support of one of the largest expansions ever. Joining me are TalkTainmentRadio.com host Irv Jallo and Dr. Bob Fitrakis. Bob, in the Free Press, you say that scandals, corruptions, and cover-ups. What do you mean as it relates to the Columbus school system?
Well, I mean, they were involved in falsifying data. If we would do that as individuals or some low-level worker for the state, we would all do jail or prison time. They were doing it systematically, simply going in and changing attendance records.
They being
and
who?
Changing
they being who?
High-ranking officials, principals, vice principals, and people even above them were essentially illegally changing public
But Jean
records.
Harris says she knew nothing about it. She said, I had no knowledge of the situation. You don't believe her?
Well, she may have had no knowledge. There's such things as plausible deniability. But it's the people she hired and she trained and she supervises and she manages. So if you've got a bunch of crooks underneath you, it doesn't matter whether you knew or not, you're responsible for
those
that.
people who may not understand this scandal, and I don't think a lot of people kind of understand, what does this mean when you date a scrub? What is the impact?
Well, what you're doing is essentially lying. You're altering the statistics to show that, for example, a student gets an F, right, and that's going to be a black mark against you on your report card from the state. So you go in and say, he got a D, right, she got a D, or a C. Or you're looking at it, we now know the unscrubbed data. On average, a Columbus public school student misses class 20% of the time. 1 day a week. There's 5 days in a week. An average student will miss 1 day a week 20% of their education.
Wow.
In the old days, the data showed it was much better because they simply went in and changed the data to show that students were attending school
So what you're
regularly.
telling me is that we don't know what kind of school system we got. Have these folks been lying to us about everything?
Essentially, when you falsify data, you do that to create a false picture. And that's the same as lying. Rather than actually meet the requirements dictated by the state, they decided to simply falsify the results.
To lie.
To create a better picture.
So, so my tax dollars are being paid for a lie, Irv Jallo.
Yeah, they
Somebody's like, well, wait a minute, that makes me mad.
Well, it should make you mad. It should make the students mad. When you are graduating students who are functionally illiterate, who are not reading to the level of junior college, then you have a huge problem. You understand? And then when you also teach students who don't have the love to go off and continue their education, we have a problem.
Wow. How can this... Wait a minute, we got a school board. School board is supposed to be the watchdogs. That's who we elect to go down there and make sure this doesn't... How could this have happened when you got school board members sitting there?
Well, let's think about the school board. There was a period really after the demise of Bill Moss when, for 2 consecutive elections, anybody who submitted a petition with signatures would be elected to the school board. That is, there were fewer candidates than seats available. Write-in candidates won in both those elections.
Right.
Now contrast back that to 2003, and that's an election I ran with at the request of Bill Moss. When Bill Moss ran for his last term and was defeated, they spent $500,000.
Why?
Well, because he said the school board was corrupt. It was falsifying records. It was allowing money to be stolen. It was wasting
said that back
resources.
In... What year did he say that?
2003.
Wow.
Which, remember, Stephanie Hightower, who had been with the Republican Leschetz administration, actually put together a reform ticket, so-called reform ticket, 2 Dems and 2 Republicans. They united both political parties
to stop
keep
Bill Moss.
Bill Moss off the school board. And they used the incident of him banging his shoe. Now, everyone recalls of a certain age that he banged his shoe. No one remembers what he was saying and why he banged his shoe.
And his banging his shoe stopped $500,000 transaction. And we still don't know what happened to that $20 million, do we?
No, we don't.
It's mysteriously, everybody got quiet about how $20 million just drains and goes somewhere. And I'm going to cover that. Scandals? What scandals? Up next on Khari, Free at Last. Welcome back to Khari, Free at Last. Does the Columbus school system have a history of scandals? Are the data scrubbing and No Child Left Behind the latest in a history of scandals and corruption? Joining me is our TalkTainmentRadio.com host, Irv Jallow, and Dr. Bob Petrakis. $20 million is missing. You say in this article in the Free Press that Columbus Public Schools has a history of scandals and corruption. That's a heck of an accusation, Dr. Petrakis.
Well, it would be if it wasn't true. And again, recall when Ben Pittman was fired in the late 1990s.
Yes, I remember.
And it was, he said...
He was the treasurer, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
African-American gentleman, the treasurer, very professional, had just won major awards. And he said he was being fired because he was saving the school money from vendors and also from renegotiating the rates on bonds and loans. So somebody who's honored nationally as one of the best treasurers in public schools is forced out. And really, since that time, you've had scandal after scandal. Scandals, let's buy old computers under Rosa Smith.
This is Rosa Smith,
with her, her son being the minority contractor. When the Pentiums were coming out for IBM, she was going to buy the older model in the warehouse, but pay top dollar for it.
You know, Bob, I'm left with the impression that this is just a trough.
It is.
I mean, it's just a big old billion-dollar trough that everybody feeds at, and you put people in positions to guarantee the feed. Is that right?
Yeah, no.
Or am I wrong?
I think the term that I've heard is that it's golden cake, because it's got over $1 billion budget, and you got this golden, and all you got to do is keep knocking crumbs and part of it.
Who's making the money off of this?
Well, the vendors, No Child Left Behind, which they were openly looting the system. I'm going to help your child, right? We've got bad results. It's all tied in together. So you're an underprivileged child. You're going to come to me for $3,000, $3,500 worth of tutoring. But I decide, I sign up as a vendor. There's no real oversight. I decide, hey, what if you give me your kid's name for $500? You take the $500, I take $2,500, and I just fill out a form and send it in and get a check. I make you a tutor.
This was going on in Columbus Public Schools.
Absolutely.
And what did they do about it?
Cover it up.
What?
Again, James Whitaker and Kennedy Kent, who stumbled upon this because they ran a free tutoring program, and they were wondering, they were hearing all these complaints from parents on their kids weren't getting the tutoring they were supposed to. So they looked into it, and you found, checks going into low-rent apartment complexes, tutoring centers.
Has anybody gone to jail for this?
Non-existent. There's been one indictment.
But nobody's gone to jail.
And that came from the state auditor, not from the school board. They went down. I went down to the school board and essentially gave them information, showing them the systematic looting of poor children's money.
I am being asked to give more money, a 24% increase, to a school system that you say has a history of scandals, plagues, and corruptions.
Systematic corruption. And their basic impulse is to cover it up. Instead of saying, thank you for that information. It was easy enough. You could have went around in your car one afternoon and realized that at the UPS office, there was no tutoring center.
going on.
And that at an inner city, nightclub, there was no tutoring
Going
being
on.
done, or at least it wasn't educational
And I'm
tutoring.
going to hit what Bill Todd discovered in a second. Yes, sir. If you go.
It just upsets me because in all of this, the children are the ones who lose out. You know, they are the ones who have to pay for this in the long run. I mean, if I'm going to a city school that is turning out, you know, illiterates and not giving you the love of continued education, then what are you really
It's a
putting
form
your
of pimping.
Yeah, what are you really putting your money into?
Yeah.
And what type of children are we turning out for the future workforce and for the future entrepreneurs? I mean,
and also you were talking about a bus schedule problem.
the bus at the beginning of this school year, where Columbus City Schools did not have the buses. They didn't have drivers like the drivers didn't have license, so they say, and they didn't complete the qualifications to drive the buses. So you had the high schoolers standing out while they picked up the middle school and the elementary school, and so it's hours.
But they've got commercials out all over the place saying, oh, for the children, oh, this is going to be so wonderful. They got that little nice music playing in the background, got these honest faces, and yet and still you're telling me no one is addressing this massive scandal, corruption that exists in the system.
Well, no, and the city claims, the mayor and the city council president, Andy Ginther, claim they're going to, you know, save this. But Ginther was there when the initial whistleblower reports came in on the data scrubbing, and he did nothing. His impulse was to essentially cover that up and not deal with the initial information that goes back to 2003 or so.
So what we're looking at is a situation where we're going to be asked to pay more, renters are going to be asked to pay more, and yet we're going to support a system that is still plagued by corruption, is what you're saying. They haven't been able to clean this up, according to what you're saying, if what you're saying is correct, Bob.
Well, it's a system, I think it is the big pig trough, is that they don't hold the vendors accountable. There's no real system in place, and the mentality is
so what are we
cover
funding?
up.
Wait a minute, what are we funding? What is our money going
We're
for?
funding a broken system. And there's no real new ideas coming out about this. I mean, the interesting part is they want to get rid of the internal auditor. The internal auditor was the only person that cooperated with myself and James Whitaker and Kennedy Kent and tried to push to hold people accountable. So it's like, okay, we had this one person who stood in the gap and tried to reveal this. She's got to go. I suspect the internal auditor has to go because she didn't cover it up.
So our children are suffering.
Yes, they are. And I think that the parents are really going to have to get up and get behind this thing and fight this system because their children are losing. It's the children. So
we need to hold somebody accountable. Who do we hold accountable for this, Bob?
Well, I think you start with the school board, those elections. The other thing, there's been a variety of things that have happened over time. The school board meetings used to start at 5. They switched them to 3.
Oh, so
so nobody can attend.
Nobody can attend.
At least if you're working,
and they changed the process where you weren't allowed to speak unless it was a agenda item and they were taking action on it. You remember they had Jerry Doyle arrested for trespassing
I definitely
at a podium.
remember that. Corruption? What corruption? Up next on Khari, Free at Last. Welcome back to Khari, Free at Last. The school year has started, and yet the state auditor's investigation of the Columbus schools has not been released. You know, it's been a year and a half. What's holding up the report? Joining me is TalkTainmentRadio.com show host Earth Jallow and Dr. Bob Petrakis. Bob, what's going on now? We've been told, I think it was February of 2012, David Yost was going to step in there and right this ship and all of that kind of stuff. Been a year and a half. We haven't heard nothing. What's up?
Well, you know, I'm still hopeful that Yost comes forward. He's been the only public official I know of that's been willing to go into that situation, just like with Jobs Ohio, where he tried to get a hold of state records. But I think there's probably tremendous political pressure on him from very powerful people in both parties. And
so they don't want another Atlanta here in the city of Columbus. Is that right? Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely correct. I think he's going to come forward with some damning and shocking information. The broader question is, I think, the timing. They want to say, well, we already solved that problem with the levy and with the new commission. I mean, look, the state Republicans...
Wait a minute. Are you implying that he is holding this report until after the election so that it won't have an effect? You're not saying that, are you, Bob?
You know, I
not
like
you. You wouldn't say that.
We get the
no,
report
but there
before
are,
voting?
yeah. I'm hoping it comes out before the election so we can make a reasonable decision. But, I mean, look what's happening. The state legislature, dominated by Republicans, passed a bill saying that we had to vote on a levy. Right. And Governor John Kasich...
Was that constitutional? You're a lawyer.
Well,
was that constitutional? How are you going to demand I vote on something?
Well, I mean, it's state law, and technically they create the schools. I guess they can pass it. It's more unprecedented. Right? There hasn't been a precedent in the history of Ohio.
I didn't think so.
A Republican-dominated state legislature, at the request of the Democratic mayor of the largest city in Ohio, then drags out the Republican governor. And the deal that was cut there, right, 10% of that money at least is going to go to private charter
You're telling me there was a deal?
So I'm...
Wait a minute, Bob. Wait a minute. You're telling me there was a deal cut between the Democratic mayor of a big urban city like Columbus and Governor John Kasich, the Republican?
How else would you go to a poor district and tell them, hey, here's what you need to do. Pass one of the largest levies in your history and give 10% of that money to private charter schools. So my tax money is now going to private charter schools.
You dropped that bomb 3 or 4 times. You must have something up your sleeve in terms of information about this private charter school. Who's going to benefit from this?
Well, historically, the people that have benefited, the owner of White Hat, which manages these schools, the Republican Party. I mean, he was the leading contributor of money in the state of Ohio a few years ago. So they seem to have cut a deal. You mandate this levy, right? I mean, you could have went in different directions. For example, you could have mandated that each school have its own school board, the model used in urban Catholic schools to be successful for years. You could have actually democratized the school. You could have done what Debbie Myers did in East Harlem. You could have invited the community into the schools, the grandmothers, the parents, the single parents.
Where's the pressure? Where's the pressure coming on Yost not to release this report or to, clean it up in a certain way? Where's this coming from?
Well, I mean, it's coming from both parties, but really it's coming from the Republican legislature, which bought into this deal, very conservative people.
Wow.
It's coming. I mean, Governor Kasich shows up at a press conference with Michael Coleman to say, we've solved this problem. It's clearly he's not even been briefed on what the problem is, but you have a massive bipartisan coalition of power brokers.
This looks like they're smoothing something over. Or maybe I'm using a nice word here.
Well, they're smoothing over a lot of people going to jail.
Well, why not have the tax abatements from the Nationwides and the lottery and the casino help out the schools? Isn't that what they thought?
Nationwide just got a big
Why not
gift.
add, the $4 billion or so dollars that's going to the suburban schools from the win-win agreement?
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, there was this so-called quote win-win agreement. Essentially, Columbus School would have plenty of money had they not given the land in the city of Columbus to the suburban school districts, and then called it by the odd name win-win when it's win-lose.
Definitely win-lose.
Who lost?
Well, obviously the children and people in the Columbus public school system. They essentially created an economic and racial apartheid district for people of color and poor
That's
whites.
that's what Bill Todd was pointing out when they did that survey. It showed that the schools in the central city, the black schools, had far less resources to work with than schools in the outer city. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. He pointed that out when he ran for mayor.
Wow. So where does that leave us, Bob? I mean, well, where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, it leaves us, I mean, one of the things is you can vote down the levy and make them come back with a different plan. What they're trying to do is stampede everything and say, look, this money will solve the problem. And again, first of all, it's still an unconstitutional system.
Is somebody
5 times the Ohio Supreme Court has said running a system based on how valuable your house is, your property tax. So people with expensive McMansions get a better school district than people who live in the inner city is unconstitutional.
Institutionalized racism is what you're calling it.
And class-based.
And class-based.
It's class-based apartheid.
Wow. So essentially what they've done is set up that kind of system. Racism? What racism? Up next on Khari, Free at Last. Welcome back to Khari, Free at Last. Was the late Columbus School Board member Bill Moss correct about the deeply entrenched racism in the Columbus public schools? How could this be, though, with black leadership at the helm? Joining me is TalkTainmentRadio.com show host Irv Jallo and Dr. Bob Fitrakis. You know, Bill Moss talked about racism being deeply entrenched in the system, but yet there was black leadership. How is that possible?
Well, Bill's perspective, and I understand it perfectly, is sometimes there's black leadership. He used to say sometimes you have to put a black face forward to get away with a racist system.
Black faces up front.
Right.
And what does that mean, though? You're saying that the system never changed? It still was racist in terms of its impact?
The basic structure, people aren't looking at it systemically. The win-win agreement, the unconstitutional, and that comes from a white Supreme Court, overwhelmingly white Supreme Court, that says, and a Republican majority Supreme Court that said the system was unconstitutional. So you've got an unconstitutional system, you've got a win-win agreement that favors essentially white suburbia. So unless you're willing to address the systemic problem, plus you've got all sorts of problems with jobs and bailouts, unless you can stabilize neighborhoods and provide jobs, that's going to be reflected in your school performance. I mean, it shouldn't be a big shock that upper middle class school districts, with 2-parent households do better.
So what we're seeing is that the system is as segregated as it was during the 1950s. I've seen many reports that show that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a matter of fact, desegregation has done nothing but create resegregation.
Well, yeah, and along race lines, but also along class lines. Yeah, absolutely. It's not a metropolitan system, right? They didn't do what certain other areas did. It's basically a inner belt, inner city district, and then essentially affluent middle class suburban district.
If you're in there, you've been in that system. Yes. How deeply entrenched is this notion of racism?
I believe it's very, very deeply entrenched. It's very hard to even become a vendor and get into the schools to help these students. They have money for it, but they say that they don't. It's ridiculous when you're starting off teaching the kids one thing and then end up taking those things away, and you don't have a base. The curriculum is an 18th century curriculum. In the 21st century, it's not working for our students. It is creating workers. It is not creating some people who to be entrepreneurs. It's not creating people to go out and really actually grasp hold of the American dream.
How do we change this, Bob? You got about a minute. How do we change this?
Well, I think, first of all, you got to invite the community back into the school system.
Absolutely.
And you have to democratize it. What we're doing now is taking the power away from the democratically elected board. We should be expanding.
By the mayor's, you're talking about the mayor's committee.
By the mayor's commission, you should be expanding the school board at each school. You should be inviting the community in. And you should read the Free Press, because I got an article.
I've often wondered about this commission. This commission, most of the people, how many of them actually live in the district?
Well,
or is this another form of colonialism?
Not all, or, you know, and we've seen this
or have students in the school system.
Over and over again, you know, and those are all legitimate questions. And for example, you know, why isn't the mayor more worried about the $250 million he gave away to the 4 families that own the Blue Jackets?
No.
So I'm not really trusting a mayor who I think has been made very bad economic decisions.
A non-winning team to boot.
But again, the Free Press has an article on this, and people should pick it up.
Irv, closing thoughts.
Closing thoughts is I think that the parents are going to have to come together along with the students
and
demand a curriculum change for starters, and then start going in and saying, this is how we want this ran. But go in with a plan.
Thanks to TalkTainmentRadio.com host Irv Jallow and Dr. Bob Petrakis. And thank you for joining us. This is Khari, free at last on Bounce 23 TV.